Remaking Silent Hill 2 is about as sacrilegious as power washing the Sistine Chapel because you think you can improve on Michelangelo's work with your finger painting skills. I couldn't fathom any developer wanting to bear the crushing weight of expectations that comes with such a task. But then along came Bloober Team, filled with fresh confidence after all their closest friends assured them that their Silent Hill fanfiction was really good. A studio who has been essentially crafting interactive resumes and sliding them under Konami's door with a cheeky note saying, "Don't you think we could make a good Silent Hill game?" With every title they released, it was clear as day they were copying from Silent Hill 2's homework, changing just enough to avoid getting caught, but also making it obvious they had no clue how the thing they cherished worked. Yet, in their wildest dreams, they probably never imagined they'd get to remake the very game they managed to partially crib from to eke out a C-. But surprisingly, they managed to finally make a good horror game. Once they were allowed to take someone else's work and trace over it, of course. The remake of Silent Hill 2 is a poster child for why your expectations should be buried 6 feet under. YouTube is so flooded with video essays explaining why Silent Hill 2 is the greatest horror game, if not the greatest game of all time, that I am positively giddy to spend the next 30 minutes throwing shade at it, because I've never come across anyone doing that before. Since Konami hasn't tossed the fans a bone since PT, the fans have spent the last 2 decades dissecting every pixel of Silent Hill 2, concluding that every glitch, reused asset, and awkward mechanic was intentional and pure genius. Try having a discussion when every critique is met with, "It's supposed to be bad on purpose." It's a bulletproof argument when you can't handle someone pointing out the painful truths about your irrational love. But here's my take. At some point, a game has to be enjoyable to play to be considered a good game. And Silent Hill 2, and let's be honest, all Silent Hill games in general, was about as fun as cuddling with a shopping cart, and controlled like one too. It's much easier to watch someone else suffer through it and then tell you why it's brilliant. An enthralling narrative can make up for a lot, but it doesn't grant immunity from criticism. Case in point, Silent Hill 4 The Room. Easily the second most intriguing plot in the series, yet is so held back by obviously bad gameplay that even Silent Hill fans don't bother covering for it with the normal excuses. For what it's worth, I'm on the side of Silent Hill 2 when it comes to the plot and characters found in it. Rather than tire my mouth out trying to wrap my lips around the end of Silent Hill 2's well-written knob, I'll give you the single highest piece of praise I can give it in one statement. Silent Hill 2 is the only video game plot that doesn't sound like a video game when you explain it to someone. It's very easy to single out even the most well-written video game plot from that of a novel or movie. When you look closely, games are defined by irrationality. Characters single-mindedly move towards a goal no matter the odds or how ridiculous, well beyond when most would reassess what they're even doing. The world itself expresses the same irrationality of existing just for this one single moment in person. Games are little more than snow globes with a few more bells and whistles. All elements you will find in Silent Hill 2. But unlike those other examples, the world that has been crafted is one where irrationality is baked into the very fabric of the characters and world. The town is either trying to kill James or seduce him, possibly both simultaneously, and you get the feeling James wouldn't mind either outcome as much as you would expect. He's not so much journeying through a video game because he feels determined to accomplish some great task, even though the game does present one to you. He's a shell of a person who encounters other broken people who only understand their own little slice of hell and are dead set on their own destruction. Normal video game plot staples that keep you moving forward are addressed as the delusions of a man bent on his own torment, which is why remaking it always seemed like an impossible task. And modern remakes of Resident Evil games have focused on reimagining them for a modern audience. When debating whether remaking a classic game is a good idea, the last 2 groups of people you should ask are 1. The publishers, because they're already compromised by the prospect of sticking their proboscis into anything that smells like money, but the next group are die-hard fans, who've played it to death, defended it, and built shrines in its honor. They're nostalgia blinded up to their cerebellum, and will have a harder time accepting a new version than a retiree embracing TikTok dances and meme culture. And Bloober Team are clearly die-hard fans. But for once it seems like we caught a lucky break. Bloober Team showed restraint, Konami didn't rush it out the door, and some angry god wasn't paying attention and allowed us to have something nice for a change. If you're somehow experiencing this game with fresh eyes, made easier by Konami's refusal to release a proper version like they did with every Castlevania under the sun, you'll probably walk away impressed. It's probably my game of the year. But when this year has seen a slate of releases that were as enjoyable as a malaria-ridden bowel movement, that's not as impressive as it should have been. If I looked like Leon Kennedy all of a sudden, I'd do more than disassociate from the past 3 years of my life. Is Leon Kennedy going to become the standard look for horror game main characters now?
I got a letter. The name on the envelope said Mary. Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago. So then why am I looking for her? Our special place. What could she mean? This whole town was our special place.
James doesn't recall this special place Mary mentioned in her letter, which is one hell of a wild delusion to form. My dead wife sent me a letter, but she didn't tell me where to meet, and I don't recall where we spent all of our time in the town. Somehow his broken mind crafted an elaborate riddle for him to slowly solve, instead of just mentioning the damn hotel. Graphics are something I have ceased caring about much these days. We are well beyond the line of diminishing returns when it comes to graphic technology. Advancement can haul right now and I wouldn't care a bit. You can depict whatever you want to depict these days without sacrificing detail. It's how those graphics are used that is far more important. It's more about vibes now than pixels. And I can happily say that Silent Hill 2 might have the strongest vibes of any game I've ever played. It's not the most technically impressive game of the year. That would go to Hellblade 2. An incredibly boring game that state-of-the-art graphics are largely wasted on. Silent Hill 2 has achieved a new level of rendering tired, grimy, and fetid environments. Just look at this rank dumpster full of the foulest stuff I've ever seen rendered. That's some good trash. The fog in town is more akin to a living thing itself, instead of feeling like it's there to hide the technological limitations of the hardware rendering distance. But the sound design is where I'm really going to abandon my sardonic, I'm not impressed by anything attitude. Akira Yamaoka can craft moving and evocative instrumental pieces that feel like a third character in the cutscene anytime he wants, and then follow that up with a track that's like being serenaded by a jackhammer mating with a wood chipper. The music never allows you to feel like a video game character that is doing something amazing. You are a dirty mental patient pretending to be a main character. There's nothing to reassure you like safe room music, no jingle to let you know when you found something important, or loud blasts to startle you. The graphics and sound complement one another while giving you the stink eye and telling you you're in a sundown town and it's past 8 p.m. Of all the characters in this series, I've always held Angela to be the most important one. A statement that might make you pause since the series has far more plot-significant characters than her in Silent Hill 1 and 3. Just looking at her or reading her biography in a wiki doesn't give you that impression either. She doesn't really do anything important, and you could remove her completely from the game and it would still work just fine. Just like in the Silent Hill pachinko machines. But Angela's the one that set the tone and showed what the town and the series were all about, far more than Henry and James or Cheryl and Heather ever could. Regarding her past, she's without a doubt the most tragic figure in the series, because it's horrifically real. You get the impression that the town isn't any worse than her home where she was abused by her father and brother, unlike Cheryl's goofy cult torture nonsense from Silent Hill 1. But it's how that past is laid out to you that is far more significant, since none of it is spelled out in detail, but forces you to infer it all from her behavior. And even once you realize it, there's nothing you can do about it no matter how much sympathy you might feel towards her. She is well beyond anyone's reach to save, and wouldn't want you to anyways. Without her, I feel that Silent Hill as a series would be a lesser thing, still carried by overused horror cliches like cults, Indian burial grounds, and demons.
I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
Yeah, I'm looking for Silent Hill. Is this the right way?
Yeah. It's hard to see with this fog, but there's only the one road, you can't miss it.
Considering what Angela has likely already experienced inside the town, I've always found her giving James directions to Silent Hill to be out of the ordinary even for her. I can't imagine James pointing down the road and saying, "That-a-way," to anyone who asks him about it after he experiences what's going on there. She only warns him that the town isn't right after telling him the way, and not right is underselling the experience quite a bit. I've never bought the excuse that the combat in a Silent Hill game is supposed to be bad to force you to avoid fighting as much as possible. A brave claim to make in games full of enemies in narrow corridors, multiple melee and firearms to fight them with, tons of health items for healing, and unskippable boss battles. No, you are supposed to fight enemies because that's half the gameplay they designed into it. The misguided idea that you weren't supposed to fight enemies is probably what led Bloober Team down the path of making walking simulators for years. Admit it, the combat just sucked, but you liked the rest of it so excuses had to be made. But fans actually managed to convince themselves that was the truth, and sabotage their own expectations. Silent Hill fans are the only community I know of that will demand a game play like crap, and then get upset when it plays like crap, but defend it to any naysayer by claiming it's supposed to play like crap. Any Silent Hill game that attempted to improve the combat was ruining the feel of the game by making it more like Resident Evil, they would normally claim. I just think those other games made terrible combat systems that were faster paced. As it turns out, once you have to wait over a decade to get a new Silent Hill game, and that game actually plays well, they sweep those old arguments under the rug pretty quickly. For the first time in the series' history, combat doesn't feel like a chore, and is actually pretty competent without also making James feel like he could put in an application for stars. Melee is his own weapon tied to the right trigger, so anytime an enemy gets close you can start wailing on them, and James sells his combat inexperience pretty realistically. He screams and wails and ends up out of breath when bludgeoning a monster to death, and it takes him a second or two to line up an accurate shot with a pistol. All this was made possible by switching to an over-the-shoulder camera system that lets you finally see what the hell you're doing when fighting. I spent the final fight of Silent Hill 1 just shooting at something above my line of sight until it died, which happened to be a devil of pure inhuman evil, and the final fight in Silent Hill 2 isn't much different from that. I know it's a vacation town, but I don't think the locals are so hard up that they need a constant supply of 5-hour energy drinks and ammo in their cars for dealing with tourists. Every area is dominated by a single multi-step puzzle that is revealed by pulling a sheet off it, as if the presentation hid that it's still just a fetch quest for some items before you can solve the puzzle box. James doesn't have any reason to believe that fixing a jukebox will help him in any way, but he'll still track down a broken record, glue it together, find a special token for the coin slot, and then the button hidden somewhere inside an apartment building's wall so he can play a song. After which a key falls out of the return chain slot and James can continue on through the locked back door. And that logic runs throughout the game. James may be broken and delusional, but his reasoning and problem-solving skills seem to be intact, and wouldn't lead him down this chain of events. I understand that James doesn't care for his own well-being, and that's why he's willing to stick his hand into strange holes in toilets and jam dirty needles into his arm, but he still needs a reason to stick his arms into those things. He has no idea that there's anything worthwhile inside the muck of a toilet or a hole in the wall, but James has a sixth sense for when it comes to puzzle solutions, or just some really weird kinks that work in his favor in this town. How would you go about advertising this apartment on Zillow? 1-bedroom modern apartment, comes with private child entrance, hallway dumbwaiter, community meth user entrance. I've never heard a melancholy tune like that played in a jukebox before, but this is a special song that reminds James of Mary and the time they spent at Rosewater Park, so James figures that must be the special place Mary mentioned in the letter and decides to head there. But the roads are blocked by curtains and sinkholes, so he has to head through the woodside apartments, which he just assumes is the alternate way through. I've never encountered an apartment building that has maps available for visitors. Apartments are organized by floor and number, making it easy to find your way around, and this place isn't that big. One interesting change this game went with was removing most of the old puzzles. There are still a few there, like dropping a case of soda down a garbage chute to free a clog holding one of the coins James needs, but that one hardly counts since the item you need is right next to the chute, but most have been replaced, and only moments of silence held for them is all that remains. I don't recall being that fond of Silent Hill's puzzles that they needed funeral rites. The mannequins start out creepy and weird, but then quickly devolve into a nuisance. At first I was thrilled with them in the apartments, but as soon as you learn their trick, standing still in the corner or behind a wall until James is in range to attack, they quickly run through all your patience and you end up checking the corners every time you enter a room like you're playing a Rainbow Six game. And they're such an incredibly common enemy that you'll run into them again and again, doing their little camouflage trick and pretending like they're hidden in plain sight. Later on, they scurry along walls, but the game just increases the amount of them, so even then the new version gets old. None of the other enemies felt overused or became a chore to fight, but Silent Hill 2 seems a bit overpopulated this time around. Laura steps on James' hand as he reaches for a key through some bars, then kicks the key out of James' reach. Because he forgets he has a plank of wood with nails on it he could use to easily reach out and snag the key. In the original Silent Hill 2, you use your melee weapon to break through precisely one wall to escape a well James was trapped in, and it was one of the more memorable moments since you had to rely on the noise the pipe made against a wall to figure out where it was hollow. That would have been a nice gameplay system to carry over, but they simplified it by basically marking the wall as a door and having James break through dozens of them over the course of the game. James doesn't want to look under the sheet at the body, presumably because some part of his mind knows what he'll find under it. Famously, all the dead humans James comes across resemble James if you look closely. One of those things that gets described as subtle genius, but could just as easily be saving money by reusing an existing model and changing the palette. And who exactly placed the sheet over this corpse? None of the monsters would. I can accept that the town of Silent Hill is messed up enough for someone to create a cell inside their own apartment to hold someone in, but why would the key to unlocking the dresser door with a peephole in it be the ball that came from an identical dresser in someone else's apartment? Eddie is throwing up due to a physical response of killing someone for the first time. The men in the fridge, who Eddie somehow surprised while the guy was grabbing a snack, because I can't think of any other explanation for why he would fall into an open fridge after being shot. Who the guy was is one of those questions you're not supposed to ask because it's explained away with, "That's just how Silent Hill works." Eddie's trauma comes from being picked on over his weight and appearance, which eventually led to him killing a dog and then shooting the owner in the leg. James and Angela make far more sense when it comes to this town reaching out to draw them in. Both of them are completely lost and broken before they reach town, disassociated from their own actions and believing the people they're searching for are still alive and somewhere in this town. But someone with Eddie's issues has to be far more common, and there is no one or thing particularly drawing him here. I'm tempted to believe that Silent Hill called out to him because Laura needed a ride here so it could mess with James more. Unlike Angela, Eddie doesn't feel like he's used for anything in particular other than a pivotal boss fight towards the end.
Might be best if you just get out of here.
Yeah, you're right. Hey, you want to come with? Maybe together we can find a way out of this town.
It's not that difficult to find a way out of town. Both of you drove here. You can walk a few blocks and leave through the cemetery. If moving some empty milk crates is too tough for James so he can head up the fire escape to the 3rd floor, then pushing a cart to climb through a hole would be too. The way the scene in the apartments with Pyramid Head and the mannequins was originally depicted feels like stumbling upon something dirty and scarring, like your parents shooting an amateur gangbang. In the remake, it's sadly been toned down and lost what made it unnerving, just as I suspected it would be. What Pyramid Head is doing to the mannequin now isn't so clear. Instead, the focus is on James's reaction to what's happening, which is largely obscured from the audience. You no longer have the thought of, what the hell am I seeing? Because there's very little to see. Bloober Team were more scared of the audience than anyone will be of this scene. This apartment would also be a fun sell on Zillow. Comes with alleyway entrance. 2 stories up. No trampoline. Angela's butcher knife is very reflective in the cutscene, but when she gives it to James, it's a dull metal with no reflection. And when you consider what the knife represents in your inventory, some reflection would have been a nice detail.
I don't know why I think she's here. She died 3 years ago.
She's dead?
Don't worry, I'm not crazy.
A little rich coming from Angela, who also doesn't realize that her brother and father are dead after she killed them, and just assumed her mother is somewhere in this town without anything alluding to that.
What about that?
Alright. Will you hold it for me?
James takes Angela's knife to stop her from harming herself, but that would also leave her defenseless. She's the only one stuck here who's unarmed. How the hell does she make her way through this town without a weapon? The knife in James's inventory is the object of suicide. Examine it too often and you increase the odds of the in-water ending. But the gun James has out at all times has no effect on suicidal thoughts. After finding all the hands of the grandfather clock, James opens a way to the exit from the apartments. But Pyramid Head is there instead of on the staircase, presumably because the old scene of him forcing a monster's head into its crotch was a little too much, and comes after James until the siren blares. I never would have guessed that being a supernatural executioner was a union job that is strict about not working after clock out.
You didn't love Mary anyway.
What? Hey, wait!
If a little girl can climb up that brick wall, then I don't see why James couldn't. This man will stick his hand in all kinds of foulness and crawl into dark rooms with monsters, but he can't be bothered to chase a little girl who name-dropped his wife. Maria is a creation of Silent Hill to play on James's desire of his preferred idea of Mary, someone healthy and vibrant who could take care of all of his sexual frustrations. Essentially, one of those local MILFs in your area ads come to life. That's why Maria constantly flirts with James from the moment they meet in Rosewater Park. But there's always been 2 things about this characterization that bugged me. She's not so much a person, as she is a decoration pinned on the world for James. She was essentially born to live up to James's sexed-up desires. She has no other element to her character other than wanting to win her man. And secondly, even though Maria is James's ideal partner, he is the most romantically disinterested man alive whenever he's around her. He's so immune to the town's attempts to seduce him that I'm surprised they kept trying. A magic talon plopped the hotter version of his wife down right in front of him, and he stumbles his way through every conversation like a used car salesman who just wants to clock out. I suppose the seduction is meant more for the player than James himself, since your actions are what determine if you get the Maria ending. Oddly, James will never ask what Maria is doing in Silent Hill. He was curious about both Angela and Eddie's reason for being in this ghost town, but when it comes to Maria, he never brings it up. He doesn't even bat an eye when she pulls a key to the strip club out of her cleavage. Trying to recall the special place Mary mentioned in her letter, James looks out over the water, where the Toluca Lake Hotel would be located on the other shore, but Maria jumps in front of him, blocking his view and claims she knows of a special place. It's a clever piece of visual storytelling, since it places Maria directly in front of James as both a goal and a distraction.
No, I just...
Is it because I remind you of her?
James is lucky Silent Hill tries to give him a new girlfriend who's into emotionally broken wife killers. Normally, it just sends a couple of monsters who half resemble secondary sex organs suffocated by a used condom and calls it a day.
You're just gonna leave me here? Alone?
Oddly, he is stuck taking care of her the entire time they're together, and caretaker fatigue is what drove him to kill Mary in the first place. Maria is the only character in the remake who received a substantial redesign. Eddie, Angela, and Laura all look pretty much the same except for maybe a few facial details. Even James only saw his face transformed into Leon Kennedy and lost the patches on his jacket since those were a little too on the nose when it came to the game's inspiration, Jacob's Ladder. But Maria, who's meant to be an alluring woman, had her outfit reworked to cover up more. Maybe Konami was worried about obviously ripping off Christina Aguilera's wardrobe again, but I think it could have been a little closer to the original than the one they went with.
This place just gives me the creeps. I'm not sure why.
You ever been inside?
I'm not sure. It does feel familiar somehow. Like a bad memory.
Maria's out here paving the road for her DLC already. I'm surprised Silent Hill didn't manifest a puzzle of some type to get the key out of Maria's cleavage. This is the first new scene added to the game, with Maria pretending like she was going to strip for James. Oddly, the strip club is the safest location in town. Everything else is run down, decayed, and clearly not working. But here, the horny keeps the lights on. James really wants to take the drink Maria offers him, but he resists the urge, probably because he has needles full of strange drugs he found on park benches to fall back on. What a stupid way to suggest James struggles with substance abuse issues, while making substance abuse the primary way to heal himself.
Kind of a local legend. Tells of a woman who was cast out, sentenced to die on an island out on the lake. There was a man in town who fell madly in love with her. And every night, he would sneak out, row across the lake, bringing her food and company.
Maybe the guy should have taken her off the island instead of rowing out there each night with supplies. Local legends are stupid like that.
But this one night, a terrible storm broke out. Caught him out in the open, and it blew out the candle. Even in darkness, the man would not give up. He would not turn back. So he fought against the raging waters until finally the lake took him.
This lake isn't big enough for a legend like that. It's just a small lake. I've actually always wondered why this lake even has a lighthouse. Lighthouses over seashores. The only lakes I know of having them are the Great Lakes.
Just to look, we can still...
Laura's scream gets their attention, but there's nothing in this town that would make her scream since she doesn't see any monsters. Laura implies that it was a rat, but she screamed from within the theater. Theaters are soundproof for obvious reasons. There is no chance they could have heard Laura's scream from inside a theater across the street from them. How do you continue to eat ice cream with your hands? Wouldn't your fingers grow numb from the cold after a few bites? There's still no explanation for how Eddie managed to order pizza in Silent Hill.
That's probably just Laura messing around.
Eddie gave Laura a ride to Silent Hill. Who would stop to pick up an 8-year-old hitchhiker while on the run from the police for assault with a deadly weapon? You're only making things worse for yourself. Out of all the locations I can imagine where having obtuse door puzzles and locking systems would be the worst idea, a hospital has to be it. You'd have people dying because the staff didn't know the complicated system for getting through a door to surgery.
Probably just a hangover.
How did Maria get prescribed medication? She was literally born from James's desires from the moment he entered Silent Hill. The town can't be that good at creating a fake person that they come with medical prescriptions. I'd rather lie down the floor than that filthy hospital mattress. She really is perfect for James. Both of them are fine touching gross things. James throws himself down a hole in the wall that could have left him trapped and mummified like so many unfortunate pets found during remodels. Like, where did he think it was going to go? It's the space between walls. Luckily for him, there's an exit at the bottom blocked by a shelf he could push over. You ever wonder how James knows which items will be important to him? I wouldn't pocket a needle I accidentally stuck myself with while holding a teddy bear. Not only because I have a stash of dirty needles already on me I could use if the situation called for fashioning a hook out of one. I've always maintained you are allowed one jump scare in your horror game. One. And you better make it a good one. This is one of those, though James does brush off a 2-story fall through an elevator shaft. For a man desiring his own punishment, James is remarkably good at enduring it.
Let go!
Sorry, Laura, but I can't let you just run around this place. You might get hurt.
Hurt by what?
I get that Laura doesn't see any monsters in this town since she's innocent and has no trauma to draw upon, but that doesn't explain why she's fine hanging around an empty hospital in the pitch darkness. She would still find this abandoned town really weird. And I call bullshit on that no trauma character trait. Laura wasn't in a hospital all by herself while latching onto Mary as a surrogate mother, and then running away to Silent Hill just because she was having her tonsils removed.
Mary's my friend. We met at the hospital last year.
Laura was a patient in the hospital with Mary a year ago, who she began to see as a friend or even surrogate mother, which means Mary never mentioned any of that to James during his visits or introduced them, or ever came across Laura while he was there. Laura came to Silent Hill because Mary told her what a beautiful place it is, so she hitchhiked despite being 8, was picked up by Eddie who was on the run for the police, and somehow figured Mary would be here even though she has no reason to, since Mary was taken home with James for a short stay, so Laura should have been trying to reach wherever those two lived. I should call her. I don't dislike this new version of the Flesh Lips fight. I'm just a little disappointed that I was able to predict they would make the metal frame turn into a spider, and then they do it again with the final boss. Metal bed frames are doing a lot of work for these boss fights. Weren't there supposed to be 3 Flesh Lips? Well, I guess there are still 2 of them, but the second one just grabs James and takes him somewhere else through the Jacob's Ladder corridor. Flesh Lips was apparently nothing but a taxi service all along. That's the face of a man who just spent the last 30 minutes finding combination log numbers only for the box to be empty. Really makes you wonder why James even expects these puzzles to help him. All he needed to do was pull the curtain down from the mural a few feet away. And this is a man that has been pulling curtains off things throughout the game after all. And the statue just held an elevator button in its mouth, making this the second puzzle in the game about finding a missing button.
It's all in the hands of our lucky contestant, James Sunderland. James, are you ready to play trick or treat?
Inside the elevator, a radio host speaks directly to James and gives him a quiz on Silent Hill history. You're expected to remember the question and all the multiple choice answers, then find the device where you enter your answers to gain access to the pharmacy where supplies can be found. It was 30 minutes before I found the room where you enter the answers, and I'd forgotten what the questions and answers even were. Also, why would Silent Hill host a radio quiz over an elevator intercom for one person? Silent Hill drips with decay and dread. But this one moment clashes so hard against the build-up atmosphere that it feels surreal and out of place. Why would the town care if James knows some local trivia?
Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there.
You're obsessed with a man who killed his own wife to be free of the stress of taking care of her, and you're surprised he's aloof about your safety.
What's wrong? I thought you wanted to get out of here.
I know. It's just... something doesn't feel right.
Foretelling Maria's death isn't necessary and actually cheapens the moment. The game is foreboding enough. Maria isn't going to have a bad feeling all of a sudden for this one room. You're supposed to have a bad feeling about the entire town. How would you go through any part of this town without having a bad feeling? This only confirms what old fans already know is coming and ruins the moment for those who don't. I wouldn't take that hand. James reached into a toilet and several goop holes with it, and he never washed up. Sadly, Maria never had the makings of a varsity athlete. Since James has nowhere to go in particular, the town gives him direction. A payphone rings, and when James picks up, there's no one on the other line. But a note falls out of the change return slot that tells him to return to the statue Maria led him to earlier, to retrieve a key to the Historical Society building that is buried there. James has no other reason to travel to the Historical Society other than this letter telling him to.
This place is different from what I remember. I guess things never really stay the same, do they?
Angela is more traumatized than I thought. She's an old-school Silent Hill fan reminiscing over the original game.
My mama? She doesn't want to see me anymore.
It's pretty easy to spot the new scenes that weren't in the original game. They just kind of meander and take up time without actually having anything to say, reiterating on things earlier scenes already clearly conveyed.
You didn't happen to see a little girl around here, did you?
James has taken on the role of Harry from Silent Hill 1, it seems. The Silent Hill Historical Society leads down into the old Toluca Lake prison. This is where the game begins operating on nothing but Lynchian dream logic, as James comes across several bottomless holes and decides to jump down each one of them, not knowing how deep they are or what's at the bottom, or if going down them will even help him. But he comes out fine each time, even though he probably fell a fatal distance. This room lacks the original game's appeal, since the spot where you break through the wall is now very obvious. They just added 2 dead-end cracks to make up for it.
You can't just kill someone because the way they looked at you.
Considering that the likely explanation is that everyone Eddie kills is a manifestation sent to torment him, Eddie was probably in the right to kill them, just as James is in the right to kill all the manifestations that come after him. It just appears as cold-blooded murder, since James doesn't see the same world of Silent Hill that Eddie does. And if not, the game has some explaining to do for why Eddie keeps running into random people who are just chilling in Silent Hill's other world. The prison goes on forever. I'm sure someone will try to make the point that it's supposed to feel dragged out because prison often is a long and excruciating experience. I expected the remake to be longer because 8 to 10 hour games are a bad idea now that companies are charging $70 for a new one. But familiarity with the environment and enemies sets in around hour 12 or so in almost every horror game, and there's nothing frightening or even off-putting to be found in something you consider the norm. More than anything else, horror requires near-perfect pacing. So bloating this game's length with more combat and larger levels was a huge disservice to an otherwise great horror experience. The scene with Angela being attacked by Abstract Diddy inside the prison was the one I was the most worried about when the remake was announced. It's one of the most powerful moments in any video game, since it deals with some very troubling subject matter in a very subtle and clever way that games normally could never touch upon, since it requires confidence in the use of nothing but visuals to establish a person's complex trauma. And anyone who's familiar with Bloober Team's past work knows just how often they drop the ball on that. They made 2 games all about horrific trauma and expression through art, and jumbled it both times, but to see that they smartly expanded on what was just one room and a boss fight into a whole sequence and still maintained the themes correctly was the moment I breathed a sigh of relief. In the original game, Angela was attacked by Abstract Daddy in a room made of flesh with pistons pushing their way through holes in the wall, while Abstract Daddy resembles a man holding a person down on a bed frame. And all of that still remains, but now there are a few extra layers. Instead of a single room, it's been transformed into an entire sequence. This level has seen James make his way through a prison. But here the style is changed to that of a home, yet it's still a prison in its depiction. Angela's to be precise. You get to relive some of her trauma of being trapped in a home with her monster of a father, running from him and hiding in her safe spot. They did remove the meat room with the pistons, though those elements are still present, but just separated from each other. And there was one moment in a hallway where the audio was nothing but vile thrusting sounds that left me feeling more than a little ill over the implication.
I thought that thing killed you. Are you hurt?
Not at all, silly.
But the thing... It stabbed you. There was blood everywhere.
Stabbed me? What do you mean?
It chased us to the elevator and then...
James, what are you talking about?
Maria is very good at gaslighting her inexplicable survival, because James drops the subject. I suppose if he's here to find Mary, who is also supposed to be dead, he might buy this, but it's a stretch given the situation.
You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
Maria?
You said you took everything. You forgot that videotape we made.
I've never quite understood why Maria reminds James of the hotel and the videotape, when before she was desperate to distract James from remembering any of that. Helping James recall what he did would work against her goal of taking Mary's place.
If you happen to make up your mind. I'll be waiting.
Making your way through the labyrinth doesn't feel quite like progressing. First you spin a cube to gain access to a new area, then make your way through it, even past Pyramid Head at one point, reach the end of the area and find yourself back in the cube room. But this process is somehow getting James closer to Maria despite no indication of progress. They already overused the reaching into dirty holes mechanic throughout the game, but I'll be damned if that wasn't the only thing on their mind here in the labyrinth. James has to wander around assembling a lighter to burn through this cloth holding a sack of meat up instead of cutting it with Angela's knife that he still has on him. While James was messing around the labyrinth, Pyramid Head stopped by and beat Maria to death. I think. She could have died to her disease, but that seems odd since she was fine a minute ago. And the prison bars are blown open and Pyramid Head's sword is stuck in the ground outside the cell. You don't get to use Pyramid Head's scissor blade as a weapon in this remake. Instead, you drag it behind James so the hallway of mannequin legs will let you pass since they're afraid of the sound it makes. I'm not going to cry over its loss, because I don't believe anyone ever used it in the original game because it forced you to move it a crawl and drag it behind you.
But you know what? It doesn't matter if you're smart, dumb, ugly, pretty. It's all the same once you're dead. And a corpse can't laugh!
Of the three of them, Eddie's trauma seemed the most repairable, but he's the one that goes off the deep end and decides to kill James inside a freezer. I've always felt like Eddie is underutilized, even here in the remake. His fall feels like it's done just for the sake of a fight. How did Laura get to the hotel exactly? James had to row across the lake to get here. The only other way is walking up the highway to the west of town, which according to the road sign at the start of the game is over 20 miles away.
Then again, maybe you're not so bad. Just... annoying.
Laura has warmed up to James, despite locking him inside a room during their last meeting, calling him fart face, then running across town to get away from him.
Laura, about James. I know you hate him because you think he isn't nice to me, but please, give him a chance.
Mary wrote Laura a letter, in which she asked her to give James a chance, knowing Laura hated him due to how he treated her while sick. Since James has never met Laura before coming to Silent Hill, Laura must have never seen James being mean or fighting with Mary at the hospital. So the only way Laura could have a negative opinion of James is due to Mary telling her bad things about him. But now Mary tells Laura that James is actually a good person deep down inside. There's also no reason to tell Laura to give James a chance. This letter was supposed to be given to Laura after Mary's death, so James would never have reason to be around Laura under normal circumstances. Mary wrote another letter addressed to James that Laura grabbed from the head nurse, but even though she claims she's never read it, the envelope is empty, the letter having fallen out somewhere in the hotel. So Laura runs off to find it. The employee elevator to the basement where the videotape is kept is so sensitive that taking anything more than a piece of paper will trip the weight limit. If that were the case, drinking a glass of water before getting on it would render it unusable. These enemies were in the original Silent Hill 2, but they didn't do anything but creep you out since they were always on the other side of the floor grating. In the remake, they're an actual threat, attacking you in the labyrinth with their tongue, and here in the basement of the hotel serving as a stealth enemy that kills James in one hit, and later you have a mini-boss fight against one in the conference room. Did you really need a 30-second cutscene of James opening a locker and retrieving his equipment? I could have just taken it out the same way I put it in there. What kind of shabby hotel just plops a VHS player on the floor of your room, and also only has a VHS player in one room out of the entire hotel? James doesn't bother rewinding the tape, turning the TV on into the right channel before inserting the VHS tape. I guess in our modern times, we've kind of forgotten that's how VHS worked. Also, this VHS tape recorded in 1990 is in widescreen even though James is watching on a CRT. The video of his wife triggers James' memory of smothering her to death just a few days ago. It's still one of the better reveals in a video game, and the way they handled it here visually and audibly is interesting. Unlike in the original, where James somehow videotaped himself killing his wife, here that scene plays out on the blank screen of the television. A neat way to visualize that it's only playing out in James's mind. And Mary's last breath is heard several times throughout the game, haunting James at key moments.
Do you know where Mary is?
I killed her.
That admission to Laura makes one of the game's endings where James leaves town with her, as her new surrogate father seem highly unlikely to me. The hotel level went through the most drastic change in the remake. Originally, the Fog World section was quick and simple. Here in the remake, the Fog World half comprises the majority of your time, while the other world section is a quick walk through it with no enemies since James's delusions could no longer harm him. In the original game, the abstract daddy boss was reused as a regular enemy you fought throughout the hotel. Here, that's been removed completely, since it was always a bad idea to turn an enemy that is tied to Angela and her trauma into a common enemy James deals with. In fact, there's no enemies at all in the other world hotel, since James's delusions can no longer harm him. There's little for me to say about Angela's final scene that will do it justice. It's easily one of the best moments in any game, and it's just two people standing on a staircase. You can read into it as deep as you like and find meaning in every detail. From the mutilated figures on the wall Angela's admiring, to the oddly steep staircase leading up into the heart of the flames that is her entire world. It wraps up Angela's story in a much better way than a boss fight, while proving she knew James better than he knew himself this entire time, calling out his self-satisfying savior complex, and that he only ever really thought of himself. It's honestly the best ending in the game, even though it's not the main character's ending. Since Pyramid Head is a manifestation of James' desire for punishment for killing Mary, he's forced James to watch Maria being killed again and again. And supposedly the second Pyramid Head is meant to represent James' killing of Eddie and his regret over that. But I hardly think killing in self-defense warrants the same response as killing your wife out of mercy or selfishness. How did the two Pyramid Heads have a crystal egg in their right hands when they just used those right hands to impale themselves on their own spears? Maria waits on the roof, but it's actually still Maria, well, depending on which ending you're receiving, who tries to trick James since apparently the sexed-up version of his wife wasn't working. Had she tried this when they first met, it probably would have worked. Maria transforms into a more goth version of herself, making her even better in my view, all to kill James, which would accomplish… I don't know. Killing James would likely erase her from existence. If that's what she wants, then fine. Honestly, a final boss fight in a game like this was never necessary and kinda narratively clumsy after everything that just happened. It's just one of those things that has to happen because it is a video game after all. It wasn't even a particularly memorable or good fight in the original game, but they've tried their best to fix that and make it into some epic clash in this game, which ruins the somber mood the scene set. Here you have James finally coming to terms with his crime and rejecting the false Mary that Silent Hill has tempted him with, and then he has to have a three-part fight against her that takes him all over the building. Maria knocks James through the floor in this new version of the fight, but James walked up a flight of stairs to reach that rooftop, and there was nothing but water below it. Depending on several of your actions in-game, healing and saving often, looking at the photograph of your wife, your ending will be radically different, but I've only ever appreciated the in-water ending. It doesn't require Silent Hill to manifest another version of Mary for James to confess to and be forgiven by, then allow him to leave town with a new surrogate daughter like he won't be wanted by the police for murdering his wife, or not having to explain to Laura what's under the sheet in the backseat of his car. It feels like the proper conclusion to a game like this, especially after what happened to Angela and Eddie. In water, see James return to his car, which contained Mary's body all along, and drive into the lake to kill himself since he couldn't live with the guilt of his actions, over which Mary reads out her final letter, and the contents of it are pretty damning in this ending, with James having killed the love of his life who was dying to a cruel disease, and who was generally sorry for lashing out at him during her illness, letting him know that she still loved him and wanted him to carry on after her death, but his own selfishness in wanting his life back led him to kill her before he could ever read her final thoughts.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
Hey there everyone, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want, vote for which of these two games you'd like to see me send next. I also recently sent Silent Hill 1 and Silent Hill 3 on my Patreon, so maybe check out the Patreon link down below for exclusive classic and DLC sim videos you can't find anywhere else. I got some really good content coming up for it as well. And you can also find my Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City sim videos on it. A big thanks to all the patrons who support me, but special thanks to Chris, Devin Canizaro, Alexander Cortez, Roman Are You Sleeping, Nervous Nelly, Xavier Distalis, Notorious SKP, Max Headroom, DJ Nelson, Azanet the Succubus, Musical Pumpkin, Castlemania, Zinro, Michelle C., Yaroslav Golubev, Dennis O'Brien, Malrose, Jake B., Donald Talbot, Montezuma, Cheshire XX13, Aaron Hines, Sky is Under, Eric Kisser, Shadow Wolf Gaming, Purple Jaeger, Church Kiones, Storm Queen Suki, S. Venus, Mario Neto, Ben Hottie, The Butcher X, and Charmsy. I'll see you all next time.